the show. Thank you for joining us. Episode 3 of the John Adam podcast, John Adams podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Dollemore.
And I'm Ian Brinksman.
And this show, for your edification, those of you who don't know or are questioning, this is a review of the HBO miniseries from 2008 of John Adams' life, starring Paul Giamatti, Laura Linney, and a host of other fantastic actors.
Yeah. I didn't do it because I respect your livelihood and your day-to-day, but I did notice some comments where people were like, wait, is Brittany going away? Is the other show ending? And like every part of me wanted to be like, yes, Brittany's going away. I'm Brittany now. I'm Mother. I did not do it. I did not. I held back.
It is the one thing that is constant on YouTube, and that is people's trepidation about change.
Yeah.
Absolute panic about change. My normal content is staying the same, the Dollemore Daily. Our main podcast, I Doubt It with Dollemore, or that's the old name of the show, I Doubt It podcast, is sticking around. It's not going anywhere. It's over 10 years we've been doing the show.
It's a brand.
Yeah, 910 or so episodes. This is just an extra added thing that we might do 10 episodes.
Yeah. This is a bonus. This is fun. This is extra content for you guys. This is a present from us to you.
Yeah, this really is just evergreen content. Like I said in the first episode, not a decade too soon.
No.
And actually, I went through searching for, because it's so hard to get even get screenshots of the content of the show without, the big black. If you ever try to record anything that's copyrighted, especially on HBO or YouTube or wherever, they don't let you do it. It just comes up as a black screen. Mm-hmm. And this episode especially is going to be difficult for me. So bear with us if you're watching this on video of me putting the assets in to give you ideas of what we're talking about.
We'll paint a picture for your mind palace. Don't worry.
That's right. So anyway, we are here. Oh, no, I was going to say, in looking for different versions of the show to try to get screenshots, there's really not a lot of reviews of this show, of the John Adams HBO show.
Yeah. Did you stumble upon the one that was like, yeah, Paul Giamatti weirdly cast as this? I was like, how did that come out? What in your head made you write that? No, and say, yeah, I'm glad you were as like angry as I was.
Who did they?
I don't know.
No. Who would they have be? They want Tom Selleck to play?
I have no idea. Yeah, maybe it's sort of like, what's the new, is it Ben Franklin show that's come out with Michael Douglas? Like horrific.
Is it out yet?
I don't know if it's out yet, but
it's coming out. Yeah.
But like an insane casting choice, like that, I can see being like, why would you? The guy I've known with great hair and skinny, being the fat bald dude.
He's super old now though, so it might play off.
Okay, I mean we'll see. I'm open to it, but it's not like Paul Giamatti was. He's like, you can't picture someone better. Like he's got the body, the face.
This is
the hair.
Perfect casting.
Yeah.
His pedigree also, like his dad's like a Princeton professor, so he's definitely,
he has the erudition.
Yeah, well-read and learned, and that's bananas to me that someone would think this is other than like Jason Alexander, the guy who is a classically trained actor. He played George Costanza. He has the body type.
The body, yeah. You're just you're typecasting now.
Right,
you're just thinking of bald fat guys.
That's right.
I mean, this was a review that came out like contemporaneously to the show, so maybe give the reviewer credit now that like it's been the zeitgeist for 15 years.
Yeah.
Where we are, but yeah, I thought that was insane.
So this particular episode is episode 3, the title of which is "Don't Tread on Me," from the famous, now usurped by conservative weirdos, Gadsden flag with the snake and the "Don't Tread on Me." And the episode primarily takes place. Well, the synopsis of the episode is really John Adams going to France to secure alliance with a military alliance and support from France.
Try to secure.
Try.
Yeah.
And
in his way.
It is an amazing episode storytelling-wise because they really bounce back and forth frenetically.
It's my favorite for so many reasons.
Between Massachusetts
that's a huge part.
And France.
It does that really well. I think it like subtly, without actually saying it, gets into the politics really well of the era.
Yeah.
Like France is like, oh yeah, this place needs a revolution. We need some Robespierre toot sweet. I love the scenes with the ship. I think it's another good example that another theme that we talk about on the show of don't be alive back then.
Oh my God.
No, so I totally agree with you. It's really frenetically paced. It's really there's so much intrigue. There's so much going on. It is by far my favorite of the series.
I love that we are I'll give you a little glimpse behind the curtain here, how the sausage is made on Ye Old Show. Ian and I don't talk about the episode until he walks through the door of the studio a little bit before we start the show. But even our notes, you texted me on your way over to the studio and said, I took a lot of notes.
Yeah.
And so did I.
You did, yeah.
4 tiny printed full pages of handwritten notes that I transcribe them over into type.
And as Jesse said, I think this is the shortest episode thus far.
Very short, but there's so much packed in.
Yeah.
And it opens with Ian's favorite.
Oh, yeah.
The insane Dutch angle on a snowy field that is just cantilevered to the side as though they're going to spill off on a listing ship.
I was so annoyed about this. I didn't even take notes about this first opening scene. I was just like, no, I remember what's coming next. This is bullshit. Let's go.
So they do open with this wild shot that I do have a screenshot of. I've already gotten it. That you're looking at now, audience. And it opens with really what is to be talked about a lot more in the episode going forward and then in subsequent episodes. And that is this quote from Abigail Adams with her walking with John down this path. And she says, it's been 14 years since we've been married, not more than half of that time that we've been together, but you are here now. And they hug. And she is so happy that he's back from the Continental Congress and that they're together.
They're going to spend a long time together.
Yeah,
she's really thrilled about that.
And it's in that embrace that she is just overjoyed that they're together again. And he is like, oh, shit.
Yep.
When am I going to tell her that he's leaving?
One very subtle, funny thing about this, so when he tells her, it's a little forward in time. They're in bed. They're clearly naked. So he waited to have sex with her and then told her. He wasn't gonna. Yeah, he wasn't gonna interrupt. He wasn't gonna potentially ruin that happy courtship. He's gonna kind of post orgasm, lay that out on her.
Post coitus. So that is my next thing is cut to Massachusetts because. After the hug, they go to the intro of the show with the theme song and everything. And then it's cut to Massachusetts, 1777, them both lying in bed. Her faced away from him, tears in her eyes.
Yeah.
And she is obviously figured it out through some scene we didn't get to witness. And she says, you're not staying. And then he tells her, I'm going to France. I've been called by the Congress. And she goes through this whole thing. This, to me, is wonderful cinema, wonderful storytelling, because it really is if you get down on the ground with this, you don't have to be looking at this from some 30,000-foot view. This is real humanistic relationship stuff.
Yeah, and it's an interesting way to put it, too, because the director took a handheld camera, it looked like, and had extreme close-ups to both of them. So you're looking at each other through their eyes, essentially. So I really like that. And I also like, too, that this kind of Adams frames all of this around his honor and what he has to do as part of this is his responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't actually believe him. Right. I think he wants to go to. I think he wants to go to France. I think he wants to be in the thick of it. He finds it exciting. He finds it
to be important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I see that.
And he sees himself as a man of history, as a lot of these guys did. As a comment. And he was. I mean, he actually was.
Yeah.
So he can back it up. And so he was such an important founding father. The securing an alliance with France was the most important thing to get the revolution, to win the War of Independence.
Sure.
There's no chance we could win without Europe. 0, 0, 0. So this was by far the most important thing that could be done. So,
and it was tasked to him and Ben Franklin. Which we'll get to.
Yep.
I don't know that I fully agree. It's certainly not exactly what they depict, because after she says, you can't rob me of my happiness, I think is what she says. And then she says, can you tell me how long you're going to be gone this time? And that there is a cost to love,
yes.
John.
Yeah.
And then they cut to him across the bed, and he has a tear.
Yeah.
So it obviously pains him.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to be away from her. At all. I think he that pains him for sure. But I don't think he's going purely because, for purely altruistic reasons. He would much rather be away from the most important part of the revolution.
For sure.
He wants,
And then the next day, I love it when they cut to really demonstrating the strength and dominance of Abigail Adams, where she just says, well, you're taking JQA with you. You're taking Johnny Boy with you.
Yeah.
You're not going alone, bro.
Yeah.
He needs this. This would be great for him. If you want him to be the man you're raising him to be, which really is driving him to be an intellectual and an important person, he needs to go.
Yeah.
And
good point. Yeah, touche.
And then when he says goodbye to everybody, there is, and we haven't really even gotten into this in the series yet, but it'll come later, is this tension between he and Charles.
Yes.
Where he goes and kisses, I think they call her Nabby, the daughter, and she cries and really tries to get emotional with him. And he's like, no, stop. Let's, the 18th century way of doing shit. And Charles he's inconsolable. He buries his head in a pillow.
Yeah, you promised you wouldn't leave this time.
Yeah.
You said you would stay. And
trauma.
Yeah, trauma.
I mean, they're really depicting trauma for a kid.
And why is my brother get to go but not me?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So the other thing that I found interesting before we smash cut to a ship getting ready to
which I have so much to say about.
Is Abigail again with her strength not wanting to break down, I guess, in front of the kids, where she's kind of like all about the business. You could tell she's wearing it on her face, but she doesn't want to display it.
Yeah, excellent acting again by Laura Linney, as always. Just, I mean, you told the story last week about the eye and the tear, which this
might have been the scene.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
But yeah, just an example of restraint,
without a doubt. Yeah. So again, smash cut to them on a ship.
Hell yeah.
And I think they're having to repair. First of all, there's the timeline they play pretty fast and loose with here.
Yeah.
So they did have a lot of trouble at sea. It was icy. It was cold. It was February. Winter back then wasn't global warming winter like we have. They were having winters then.
I mean, even now, being in the North Atlantic in February is not going to be, even for you, sure. I feel like you'd find it a little bit nippy. No, we were talking about this. This is this week's example of don't be alive in the 1700s. Because it is awful. Couple really brutal details I want to talk about, because I recently, again, I'm into Napoleon, so I've learned a little bit about Napoleonic sea battles.
And that's only, 15, 20 years removed from this?
15 years, 15 years, essentially, like, depending where you started. But Nelson, I think, died in 1801, so,
right,
15
Jefferson's
years.
Administration.
Mm-hmm. So, a couple of fun things. So, what they got really right. Obviously love seeing all the snow on that. I loved watching Adams just vomiting his fucking guts out.
Yeah.
As he's trying to set...
While John Quincy Adams practicing his French out of his little book.
Out of his little book, yeah. Completely unbothered. When it's happening on the ship, Adams gets alerted that a Royal Navy vessel is closing in on them. And they can't outrun it, so the only thing they can do is fight them, essentially. Mm-hmm. Fighting on the high seas is so bad. So bad. So a couple things. One, they got right, is the surgeons were always down below. And they were just ready to go because you're losing limbs. You're losing a shitload of limbs. If they are lucky, they had time to go change into silk tights, because that makes it easier for the surgeon when he's amputating to have to pull off something less. They can just cut through them. So... just to give you the idea there, obviously no anesthesia, they had no germ theory, so they're just using rusty ass things.
I mean, if you think Civil War surgeon scenes in movies are bad, this is an order of magnitude worse.
Yeah, and it needs to be emphasized enough that, like, the British Army was always pretty bad. The Royal Navy was not only better than any navy out there, it probably in this moment. There's never been naval superiority like this before or since, right? Like, just a British naval officer in a boat through just, like, the sea swells could tell what the weather was hundreds of miles away and be able to kind of adjust course. It takes like 30 years to get like that.
Yeah.
So they're really the only ones who could do this. So the fact that he was being bear down upon by a Royal Navy vessel, like that is like a you make your britches brown kind of moment.
So this is where they did get it wrong. They encountered the British Navy, and they were able to. They were far enough away that they were chased, and they got away. And then, later on, then there was the massive storm. Then there was the storm that we start with, and they break the mast and all the stuff. They have to do repairs at sea. They showed all the body bags of the people on the deck. Yeah. And then they spot a British ship that's close enough, a frigate or a warship, it's a military vessel, that they're able to pursue, and then they capture the British ship and then haul it to France finally.
Got it.
So when the guy loses his limbs, his leg, the lieutenant on the ship, Baron, I think his name is.
It was a cannon backfiring.
Right. Yeah. It was them signaling to a French ship. I had to look all this up.
Oh, did you?
Today.
Okay, yeah.
I had to look all this up today to make sure this was all right.
It is very cinematic, and because I said that too last week. I was like, I don't think this happened.
It's better for the narrative.
Yeah.
But what happened was they saw a naval vessel as they're towing this after they had captured this British vessel, and they wanted to signal to the French that they were. And apparently how you did it was to fire your cannon in a certain way. And then it backfired. It exploded, the cannon, while firing, and it severed his leg, and it really messed him up. Yeah. They took him down below where they do and actually John Adams was there holding him while they amputated his leg just below the knee.
It was a rough scene. But
and he didn't die in the moment. It was about a week later.
That makes sense. I did think he bled out pretty fast, especially because they did get that just awful metal, twisting thing onto his stump to stop the bleeding.
But in the scene that they're playing a little fast and loose, but John Adams, when he grabs his musket and goes back, he's told, in fact, he's told by the captain of the ship, Mr. Adams, I am commanded by the Congress to carry you safely to Europe, and I will goddamn well do it. Now get below. He goes down, but then he hears the fighting and all the bullshit going on. He does grab his musket, and he does go up on deck and fight. So that's a real thing.
Happen?
That's really happened.
That happened? Yeah. And what I liked about it too is they didn't make it particularly heroic. Like he stuck his musket out of the window. He shot entirely too early.
And also, the ship was so far away. Muskets have an effective range of like maybe 50 yards.
Effective is a really liberal use of that word. Right. Yeah, and he was completely useless. And I like that they showed that. Like it was very clear that he was just kind of. He was almost symbolic.
Duty-bound to go up there.
Right.
I'm not going to be... I want to be a man. I want to be up there with the action.
Especially with his little son there.
Yeah. So that did happen. It does paint a picture of misery. Yes. They also show these grizzled sailors who are ready to take on whatever comes and commanded to aye, sir. They're running around. These were they'd seen
grizzled
vets.
They seen some. They had some city miles on them. They were missing eyes and various appendages. It was they were not doing great.
So it was a perilous journey across the Atlantic to go to France. It took way longer than it needed to because of bad weather and then the skirmishes with the different vessels.
And just the Royal Navy, right? Because the Royal Navy controlled all of that water.
Yeah.
And it was a constant fear. And if you got caught by them, more often than not, you're going to lose.
And it's not like you could just take side streets and go a different route. They have to follow the currents and also the wind. So you're in, I don't know what a 25 mile or a 50 mile, you're in a certain thoroughfare of water.
They're sea lanes, essentially.
Sea lanes,
right?
exactly.
And they're that's exactly right. The enemy vessels are following the same wind and current. So right. You're never far off.
Yeah, you can't go another. No. Yeah, we'll just go.
Yeah.
500 miles south or north.
Right.
You're in the road that you have to take.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's why they went in February too. It's they're going to be less shipping. It's because it's a dangerous, disgusting time to be there.
And
boy was it.
He's in his hand. I mean, really, the scenes that they show, and again, through cinematography and the lighting and how they color grade the footage, it really does look dank and miserable.
Nope. Another example where I would just kill myself. I would just immediately just like, all right, guys, you guys got it? You got it? Okay, I'm going to jump out of the boat.
And then we get our first cut back to Massachusetts, showing Abigail toiling and farming on her own, kind of taking care of the fort.
Yep.
And it is a bounce back where they show France and then Massachusetts and then it's a juxtaposition of what's happening with the Adams family. Really artful, I think.
Well, I thought so too. And when she was talking, I assumed you wrote the quote down. I heard that quote about like, why do the boys do that? We let them. I was like, that's such a Jesse quote. I'm going to let him take that.
I did not write it down.
Never mind.
But that is what it was. Yeah. It's the daughter saying, why do the boys always get to do? Why do the boys always get to do all the fun things or these things? And she says, it's because we let them.
Yep.
And then when she goes, well, when they get back, we're going to have to be very strict with them.
Yes.
And Abigail, I mean, I think she's swelling with pride that her kid is noodling all this. Yeah. And she says, well, when they get back, we're going to be so goddamn happy to see them.
Yeah.
It's not going to matter. None of this is going to matter. And it was a cool moment.
It's a cool moment. And yeah, that's you could have played that scene much more like cornily. And I like that sort of subtle nod to reality.
Yeah, what I like is they're really drawing a juxtaposition of the hard Scrabble life that even people who were, and they weren't, maybe not technically aristocrats.
I was, yeah. I mean, they were
aristocratic,
landed gentry, I would say.
Yeah. But I mean, aristocratic in Great Britain is a whole different can of worms than it was in the colonies.
Yeah, right. They were part of like the lower gentry, which is part of why they went over, right? Like the upper gentry had too much money and all the land and all the titles and everything else. So this sort of,
if you were just below that,
that's why you go to the New World to get your own new land and your own new titles.
Yeah. So it really shows her out there doing the work, holding down the fort, making sure that the crops are planted, and there's so much work to do. And then they immediately cut back to France with John Adams, who, by the way, at this time is 43 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Franklin, who we're getting ready to see, is 72.
Yep.
So there's a more than a generation of distance between these two guys' age.
Yep.
And they show John Quincy Adams and John Adams in this carriage, far fancier than anything we've seen up to this point. Mm-hmm. And they pull up to a mansion far fancier than anything we've seen up to this point.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be the embassy, right? I think, because they said that's where they're posting essentially. So
I think they are hosted by different literal aristocrats.
Yeah, they have to go to court. So
yeah, that's right.
Back in the day, the French court was a combination of where the king lived, but it's also where all the his ministers met, but also the social gathering. It's kind of the entire. If you were Versailles, right? Yeah. But if you're anyone, you wanted to be in that court.
Yeah.
Like that is where everything happened, and holy shit, that court.
Yeah, and it is. We're getting there, but it's amazing the juxtaposition between the opulence and the lack thereof in the States. Like it is ostentatious, this giant castle, and they pull the carriage onto the cobblestone little driveway that's in the portico or whatever, and he gets out and he's like, echo, hello. Like it's just so huge. And
marble, no one's there.
They really, it's arresting how quickly they introduce you to the dickishness and the snobbishness of the French.
Effeteness, I would say, too.
Even the guys who are driving the carriage are dicks.
Oh, yeah.
They toss the bags, and then if they could have screeching tires as a sound effect, it would have worked, because they just barreled out.
And what I liked about it, too, is it showed that, like, without saying it, again, it's another reason why I really like this episode. So much of it is show, don't tell, which I really appreciate. Good
cinematic storytelling.
For sure. And it's showing that, like, Adams has to compromise some of the things he believes in, and he knows that he's being a hypocrite right now. Like, we're doing this whole revolution about overthrowing monarchy and about the yeoman farmer and freemen and things like that. And how are we doing it? We are rebelling against a far more liberal, far more democratic England with the help of maybe the most conservative court in Europe, in the French. And like it could, and like visually, you could not see that more clearly than you have in these scenes.
Especially when we get to the next scene, which we're gonna get to, with the foppish dandies and their makeup, and they have their little Cindy Crawford mole attached to their face.
Everyone is powdered. Everything is powdered.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
So let me find my notes. So they walk into the mansion. He's screaming for Ben Franklin. Where are you? Where, he doesn't say where are you, but he's looking for Franklin.
Dr. Franklin.
And then they go around this, and seriously, it's a giant palace.
Yeah.
And they come around the corner to this little grassy area, and this famous sculptor, they don't name him, but his last name's like Huron or something. He was commissioned to sculpt Benjamin Franklin,
his bust,
who was there, and it immediately sets, as you can imagine, it immediately sets John Adams off.
Yeah, it's like kind of going to Jabba's palace, sort of just seeing this fat guy kind of lounging there, clearly had a few cocktails, clearly met a few nice young ladies. It was not what Mr. Adams was hoping for. Also,
especially when he just learns that the treaty of the alliance, the Treaty of Alliance between the France and the colonies, the new United States, it was all but signed already.
I think it was signed. That's what he said, but they didn't have any details.
Yeah, but what work was there for John Adams to do? So it was it was a blow to his ego
for sure.
And he wears it on his face. He wears it in his language. He says, "Rarely has a man endured so much to so little point."
Such a drama queen. Such a drama queen.
He really is.
And he will do this self-loathing, self-pitying bullshit for the rest of his life. He will say basically the same thing about the vice presidency. I mean, he's right there. Absolutely. Actually, but regardless.
And also, this episode really is that.
Oh, yeah. No, he is, to borrow a phrase, he's quite butthurt, I would say, throughout most of this episode.
Well, and it really does go to the selfishness and ego that he has, that he wants to be, to your point, maybe this does reinforce your point from earlier, that he does want to be a man with his hand on history, guiding what is taking place. He wants to have a role in the formation of these alliances.
Yeah, and he is so arrogant that he is going to do it his way, regardless of what.
We'll talk about that. Yeah. We'll talk, because I've had some thoughts.
I'm excited about that.
Well, let's get to the salon.
Yeah.
To the salon with all of these.
I mean, that's fair, because we're inviting you into our salon. So now.
Oh yeah, well let's drop it. We want to hear from you. We have an email address, info@johnadamspodcast.com. You can call the number for the Dollemore Daily, which is 714-576-4054. And then at the end of the episode, we're doing this all out of order. At the end of the episode, we're going to read an email from a listener and talk about some of the comments that we've gotten online. But they are in court, not at Versailles, I don't think, but it's one of these, I think it's the rich lady's mansion.
Yeah.
Because when they walk down the stairs at her house to introduce her to John Adams, she mistakes him. This is the blow to the ego thing. Yeah. She mistakes him for, are you the famous Samuel Adams? And it's just like, no, I'm not my cousin, man. He wants to be recognized. And instead, he's mistaken for his apparently very famous cousin,
handsome,
Samuel Adams.
Cool. Yeah. No, I didn't want to go back. I did want to talk about this whole scene, because I think this scene is breathtaking. Because camera goes in, you see the stairs, you see just, like Jesse said, just fancy lads. Everyone is powdered, every wig, everything. Just like deer walking around for some reason. People, it's just decadent in the feet, and just every stern, Adams is every bit the stern New England sort of no nonsense guy, and it's offending every single one of his senses. And then you juxtapose that with Ben Franklin, he's basically dressed like Davy Crockett, essentially.
There's even a conversation about it, and John Adams says to Ben Franklin, "Who did your suit? A taxidermist?
Right,
did a taxidermist make your suit?"
Yeah.
And Benjamin Franklin says something like, "We're all playing a role here. We're all actors here, and so far, my part has been well received."
And he's right.
Yeah,
he's 100% right. Every time Franklin gives him advice, it is the correct advice. At least in this episode, I would say.
Yes, and they do have. There is a. Let's wait to get there.
Yeah. Let's wait to get there.
But
very funny too. As they're going down the scene, Franklin suggests to Adams that he maybe take a mistress.
I wrote it down.
Yeah.
Ben Franklin, take a mistress.
Take a mistress.
Which very much bothered Adams.
Oh, yeah. No,
because that's not his jam.
No. Again, he is a serious man here to do serious things. He's from New England. He's not the ass-getter that the fat, ponytailed Ben Franklin famously was.
And also, I think that's against his constitution
100%.
Personally.
Yeah,
He's dedicated and loyal to his wife.
Yeah.
He loves her.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to show it a lot of times. In this episode, we'll get there.
No, but it is interesting to me because he is himself is not a Puritan, but he comes from more of a Puritan kind of area.
Influences of New England.
For sure. Whereas Franklin, his influences were very much continental and
hedonistic, one might say.
Well, one does say. And you can guess which one the effete, what we now call sex positive, I would say, French court took two more.
Yeah, don't kink shame Ben Frank.
No, I'm not. I am venerating Mr. Franklin.
So the next scene is them at the salon where they're all sitting around like sumptuously and provocatively eating strawberries and shit. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in.
Do you think the director made it seem like it was supposed to be a stand-in for something else? I wasn't sure.
Like a vomitorium?
No, I was just like saying like, oh yeah, this is sex. Got it.
Like an orgy in ancient Rome.
Which I'm
Greeks.
sure they did orgies there too.
Oh, I'm sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Even the ease with which the French even now, like every prime minister has a mistress and it's out in the open.
Oh, yeah.
I read somewhere today that it was hard for the Russians to influence statesmen in France because they'd be like, the KGB would like, oh, we've got your number, we've got you on tape. Having sex with your, and they're like, all right, tell her. My wife already knows. You're not going to influence me that way.
Yeah, no, don't make me look cooler to the public.
And that's absolutely what we have in 18th century, late 18th century France with these knuckleheads. And so they start kind of interviewing John Adams about who he is, and they're all put off that he doesn't speak French, and they are all uber wealthy freaks.
Yes.
They are gross rich people.
Gross rich people, extremely inbred. Like you know, they didn't show it, but Habsburg chimps probably abounded amongst this group.
And they start asking him about like, are you catching the cinema? Are you going to the? It's a terrible French. I'm like a cartoon character.
We can both do it if you want. Yeah, Mr. Adams, are you? Do you have a mistress?
Have you gone to the l'opera, the music? And he's like, yeah, I don't have time for that.
Listeners, by the way, French people love when you do this to them. I highly recommend it. You just need they view it as a sign of respect.
That's right. Well, listen, I'm only doing it for these for 1700s French people, not modern day French people.
No.
They're definitely worthy of all the respect.
Yeah.
I mean, if we really to be speaking French accents, it would be German.
Oh yeah.
Because they just gave up when Hitler came a knocking.
This is.
Oh, am I offending your delicate sensibilities?
This is offending my. The French before World War II were considered the biggest badasses in Europe. Like historically, they were considered the warrior race, and it was only.
You're talking about way pre World War II.
No, even through World War I, they were still considered.
Is that right?
Yeah. They was by far considered the most. Prussians then also it was always between the French and the Prussians, right? But like historically it was always the French. They were the by far the best army, usually always ahead in terms of military discipline and other types of doctrine. But they also liked having sex too, right? That was sort of the difference between the Prussians and the French. So it was only after, granted they didn't do great in World War II. Gotta say that.
Didn't do great, indeed.
Didn't do great. Didn't help that half the country was already kind of pro-Nazi. That's sort of the other thing.
Well, not a lot of difference in modern day France.
That's
pretty
true
racist
too.
country.
Yeah.
Not like we're any.
No, but you're absolutely
prize.
right. I mean, like the Vichy, the same people who are Vichy France are now Marie Le Pen's party. Like it was literally one for one.
Yeah. So
look, this is a history podcast. You're going to get a lot of history.
So the salon thing, when they start grilling John Adams, this is maybe the best scene in the whole episode.
Yeah.
It's in an episode that is packed full of good scenes. This is a great scene because they're asking about what are you going to do, and are you going to go out? First, they're bothered that he doesn't speak French. He's like, look, and he did try. They don't show that he tried, but he absolutely was trying on the way over because apparently the language of diplomacy globally was French at the time.
Still is.
So he says to the foreign minister, the guy who is like pink skin, because
I didn't even realize he was the foreign minister. I just thought he was just a guy, like
just a dickhole.
Yeah, just this like, who is this like lesser prince? And it's like, oh yeah, foreign minister.
And this all ties into and feeds the whole narrative of John Adams' ego being just dashed asunder, just crushed from every moment, because they're asking him about going to the cinema and the opera and music. He's, look, I don't have time for it. And they mock him. He's translating what he's saying into French. He's, oh, he's too busy for the music. Mm-hmm. And they're being dicks to him. And he immediately goes in and in his John Adams way is trying to get them to come around to military support,
or give details of the military support.
Yeah, and he's not doing it in their time span, in their way of doing things, where you have to eat your strawberries like it's a sexual genitalia, and like they want it done their way.
Yeah,
in their rich people, slow to move way. And he says to this foreign minister guy, he says, I must study politics and war so that my sons will have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons must study navigation and commerce and agriculture so that their children will have the right to study painting and poetry and music, to which Ben Franklin gives this approving, like, that was genius, that was brilliant, good move there.
Yeah, that was the first time.
Yeah,
I mean, like, I take your point. I can tell that you're very much feeling Mr. Adams. You'd be like, if you were in that spot, you would do the same thing. But like, that is diplomacy, right? Like, that is what you're taught to do. You're in another country.
I get it.
You have to like abide by their customs, especially in a delicate thing like this, where again, like, this is the war. If they don't get the French, they don't win.
Okay, here's my issue with all of the fanboys of Ben Franklin and people who dismiss the efforts of John Adams. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're one of them, but I think we needed both attitudes on the scene at the same time, because he communicated what needed to be done. We need this, and nothing less will be acceptable. But then we also needed the guy who had his face emblazoned on cups and plates and statues and paintings, because Ben Franklin at the time was like Brad Pitt. Yeah. They've said that the only man more famous than Ben Franklin in Paris during this time was Voltaire.
Yeah.
So he was super, super famous guy.
Yeah.
They loved him for his rustic bullshit, his taxidermy suits and stuff.
Yeah, all made up.
But I think we needed both. And you can speak to diplomacy more than me.
No, but I'm sympathetic to that as a general like role. Like, I'm sympathetic that you have someone who is the extreme, so that then they can like talk to the other person, that like, you know, it's the whole MLK, Malcolm X.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sympathetic generally. I just don't know if that's actually, and that's, it seems to be what was the filmmakers did here. So I'm sympathetic to it. I don't know if that's historically accurate though. Like, I don't know how much I don't know how useful Adams actually was in the court versus like, because I know he eventually got, you know,
he got axed because of a letter, which you have a copy of in front of you. A letter that Ben Franklin actually sent to the Congress. You know the scene where they read, I think it's the next scene.
Yeah.
Actually, the next scene is cutting to Abigail back in Massachusetts.
Yeah, right.
But then they have the audience with the king, which we'll get to. We can jump ahead here. But Adams does get fired by the Congress. He gets demoted to where, or Ben Franklin gets promoted to be the only representative of the United States in this time.
Yeah.
But it's not just me that thinks this, that Ben Franklin was maybe out of turn.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur Lee, who was the other guy who did negotiate the treaty with France, they also had his number, Ben Franklin's number, as being kind of extravagant and kind of showing off and getting lazy in his old age.
Sure. I guess my only point was I don't know the historiography well enough, so I don't know if like Adams actually was useful being there. In the show he is. I just don't know in reality if he actually was, or if he was like immediately sidelined due to his.
Well, it seems like common sense to me that if you come in and you're the brash, bold bull in a china shop, that then it would give Ben Franklin a lot more leeway and negotiation room to say, that is absolutely we need. He's just super passionate. Just, so they recognize, oh shit, they really are serious about this.
Maybe.
We'll do it in our own time.
Maybe it could, but the other way could be as well. It's you've offended these people that take this thing very seriously. They take like this, the manners and how you do it and when you do it and what you say and who you say it to. That all matters extremely. The custom, yeah. And
I'm probably looking at it from a 21st century.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like, I don't think you're necessarily wrong. I just personally don't know, and I can understand Franklin being like, we will lose this war if we don't get the French. Why are you being antagonistic? We need. What he had that great quote here, which I do love. Adams does. He's saying about Adams: direct insult followed by petulant whine.
Yeah, which follows when they actually do get the meeting with the king, and they couldn't have picked a better guy or done his makeup better to be King Louis with his weird spotty unibrow and his mocking. What? He does not speak French? Just it's so over the top and awesome.
Yeah. It's like. Look, we know the revolution's coming, but can we just like speed it up a little bit? Why don't we just like stay here for a while? Let's see Madame Guillotine get in here. Let's have some fun with it.
And then they leave. They go on a walk with the king or whatever. And again, John Adams is actually literally physically left in the room, kind of like what just happened. After having been mocked for not speaking the English, after nothing getting accomplished that he wanted accomplished. And then they walk out into a corridor, and Ben Franklin, in a non-folksy storytelling way, in the most direct moment, maybe in the entire series, Ben Franklin says directly to John Adams the thing about the petulant whine. But he also says, a good diplomat observes much, acts little, and speaks softly. To which John Adams screams and disrupts everybody in the court. The king's not there. And he says, I will not voluntarily put on the chains of France while I'm struggling to throw off those of Great Britain. Brilliant.
Great line.
And I'm sure that's from correspondence and not something that was actually recorded and said.
Yeah.
But that was what was at risk here, too.
Sure.
The France weren't just being altruistic, good people about it.
No.
It was in their interest, both militarily and economically, to have us rise. And when they're having the meeting with the foreign minister guy, like the main foreign minister to Europe and like the guy who was chatting with the unibrow king in the room, he says, we need look, we're already at war with Britain and we can't spread ourselves too thin. Their navy was large enough that they could spend some money, send some ships, and still have a defense against Britain.
Yeah.
And the way that the military works, and these people knew it better than anybody, because in the day, one of the reasons Britain lost was they were spread too thin.
Yeah.
They did have a war with France, and by sending all the troops to England, it just spread them too thin, and they couldn't maintain two theaters.
The American Revolutionary War was essentially a world war. Because they were at war with France, a war with the Dutch, a war with Spain. Basically, every European great power went to war on our behalf, not because they necessarily cared about our cause, but to your point, the
rich resources of the colonies.
The rich resources, and it hurt England, which at the time was the predominant power in Europe.
Right. Run by a petulant child.
Yeah.
King George.
Yeah, for sure.
And he was.
For sure.
Like
had parliament. I mean, of the great powers, by far the most democratic, by far the most liberal.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. So they cut back to Massachusetts. I'm glad you're on top of that, because I wasn't even really, like, it's like, okay, we're back to here, farm stuff, or like, well,
it wasn't really clicking with me until you started talking about it, and I do like the juxtaposition.
The juxtaposition of what's going, like he's over there having fancy ass meals with fancy ass freaks, and she's toiling away. And then we cut back to Massachusetts, and it's actually the first time that she's not having a terrible time. That when we cut back to her another time, she's like compulsively cleaning windows in the middle of the night, like she's having a breakdown. But now she's having dinner aboard a French naval vessel with French officers and dignitaries, including Sam Adams and Benjamin Rush, who at this time was, he's a doctor, a physician, but he also was like the Surgeon General of the Army. And he goes off a little bit bitching about how I didn't take any notes on this, but how he's bitching about how the Congress will not fund proper hygiene, proper gear, proper ammunition, proper bivouac tools and resources. They're just not getting it done on the part of the Army, and he's bitching about it. But it's Abigail Adams having dinner with Benjamin Rush and her cousin, I guess, by marriage, John Adams' cousin.
Sam.
And they're talking about that John Adams is over there. And you could tell on her face that she is bothered by the fact that she has not yet received any letters from him, like no correspondence, because one, he's busy, but two, I think it's hard for him. I don't think it's as easy as just he's over there and F them, I'm not going to deal with this.
I didn't want to give the impression that I thought that like he was excited to go and leave his family or be away from Abigail. I don't think that at all. I just think that like this is a man who thinks very highly of himself.
For sure.
And like
but he's not alone in that. Again, I think we need to reinforce that every time we say it.
I do. Totally.
Certainly Ben Franklin does too.
But I don't think he's necessarily a good diplomat, right? He's fucked up at every single, other than one really good quote on dinner, which he pulled himself out.
Yeah.
But like he didn't keep that momentum going.
No, and also he never really was a good diplomat because of his ego.
Yes, exactly.
He was too big and too important a character to send. Yeah. Now, Ben Franklin's perfect because he just wants to bang old ladies and drink and have a good time.
Yeah. He's
fits right in.
5-star pimp, obviously. But this is what made him so good in the Congress, being able to stand up, give these powerful orations, like everyone eyes on him. Like that works great for Congress. Yeah. That's great for his skill set.
And our culture in the colonies.
And our culture. That's a great point. Yeah. Less so at Versailles.
Right. So they just show, it's a brief scene where they're on the ship, the French ship. And the reason I know it's French is because they get the fleur-de-lis on the flag flying when they cut to the scene. And then they cut back to France. Again, it was back and forth for this 55 or 68, how long, how was this, an hour, 6 minutes? 68,
it was only,
minutes?
I don't even think it was that long. I think it was only like 58 minutes,
They cut back to France, and it is John Quincy Adams and John Adams talking about the lack of letters, because he got a letter from his mom, and he's relaying to his dad, hey, listen, mom's bummed, man. No letters, what's up? And that's when they get this note from Congress saying that he'd been demoted, or that Ben Franklin had been promoted to be the sole rep from the United States to France. And then they cut back to Massachusetts again, and this is the scene where she's cleaning the windows in the middle of the night. Yeah. Black night. She's cleaning the windows, and the daughter comes, and she like unleashes a fury on the daughter, yelling at her, you don't tell me how to be, or whatever. Yeah.
Clearly just the stress and anxiety of her firstborn and her husband being away.
Right. And she said, not indirectly, she directly talks about the fact that, why no letters? Who am I? What is so important? Yeah. Why am I so of little import that he can't write letters? What's going on? Yeah. And it's distressing, and they're setting the scene.
And it is interesting because like I was sympathetic with her, where it's like, knowing this guy, he's probably like, well, this is too important. Like my life is too like incidental. I need to put all of myself and all of this into my work and this. But I think you're right. I think he was kind of ashamed. Yeah. I didn't really put that together until just now, but I think that makes sense to me.
You know how, and let's put this in modern terms, that you get an email from somebody in your past or whatever, a text maybe, and you don't answer it the first day, and then you wait, and then you don't answer it a week, and then a month goes by, and then 6 months goes by, and now you're like, fuck, now I can't reply because like you're just embarrassed about it.
And in that time, everyone has yelled at you. Everyone says you're bad at your job.
Yeah, I think,
you've alienated everyone.
I think that's what happened. And also the reason it's vague in my mind, I don't want to speak to it like it's fact, but I've read the book multiple times. Great book, everybody. Put a link in the description. And I think they convey that he did toil over this whole thing of writing and not writing, and it wasn't just dismissing her out of hand. Yeah. He was a loving husband, but there were bigger things afoot, and
and he was humiliated.
Absolutely. So then here's the other thing about the timeline. So the timeline in the show in this episode is wrong. He actually does go back to they cut right from France to him in the Netherlands as though he never went home. He did go home. He went home in as soon as he left France in like 1778 or 79, maybe 80. He went home to be with his family.
Yeah,
and then he went back to the Netherlands to try to secure a loan. From the Dutch.
The Dutch at this time, other than England, were sort of the main financial hub of the world.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a very necessary step. And I like that scene too with the Dutch because it showed how austere it was. It was like a very dark room. It's the exact opposite of the French.
Council.
Yeah, this council.
Lording over him in a singular chair in the room.
But yet I felt like he felt a little more comfortable there. Like these are his people almost, right? Like, this is dark.
Logic bros.
Yeah, logic, right. Yeah, logic bros. Yeah, like let's get to the facts and logic.
And so John Quincy's still with him.
Yeah.
Great. They turn him down for the money.
Yeah.
Because the United States hasn't established any credit yet. What happens in this particular thing is he's sick. And he did. He almost died. He was so sick. He couldn't shake it. And this is also when he sends John Quincy Adams to Russia, to St. Petersburg, to be the attendant or the secretary, because he speaks fluent French, of the guy who's been dispatched to Russia as a diplomat from the United States. And this is also when they read the letter from Benjamin Franklin to the Congress that was read in Congress, where, again, does get on my nerves. The Ben Franklin,
I love this,
throws John Adams in no uncertain terms right the fuck under the bus. I'm going to read just a paragraph or so here. This is from the National Archives. This is a letter from Benjamin Franklin to Samuel Huntington, the President of the Congress, August 9th, 1780. This is from the National Archives. Mr. Adams has given offense to the court here by some sentiments and expressions contained in several of his letters written to the Count de Vernegues or whatever. That's the guy that he had the screaming match with. I mentioned this with reluctance. He also capitalizes. They all did this.
They do that.
There were no rules for grammar or spelling.
Was that it? Okay.
Yeah. I mentioned this with reluctance, though. Perhaps it would have been my duty to acquaint you with such a circumstance, even were it not required to be by the minister himself. It is true that Mr. Adams' proper business is elsewhere, but the time not being come for that business, and having nothing else here wherewith to employ himself, he seems to have endeavored supplying what he may suppose my negotiations defective in. He thinks, and he tells me himself, that America has been too free in expressions of gratitude to France, for that she is more obliged to us than we to her, and that we should show that spirit in our applications. I apprehend that he mistakes his ground, and that this court is to be treated with decency and delicacy, meaning delicateness.
Yeah.
That's throwing him under the bus. This shows some duplicitousness of Ben Franklin that often doesn't get ascribed to him.
All the founding fathers were extremely messy bitches, and they all wrote the most catty letters about each other and would publish them all over the place. So very, very catty.
Throwing John Adams under the bus to the Congress.
For sure, 100%.
And this is what got him fired.
Yes, 100%. agree with all that. I would just simply say they all did this because they're all just fancy lads that all went to like dumb little boarding schools, and they all talk like this and gossip behind each other's backs.
But our modern understanding of Ben Franklin is completely different than that. We think of him as the coonskin cap goof guy.
Yeah, the guy who invented electricity, which he didn't, but whatever, you know.
It is also, and we probably won't get to this because he leaves the scene pretty soon here because he's old. He goes to die.
Yeah.
But like he cut his son off because his son was more of a loyalist to the crown.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It was a messy family too. Yeah. Ben Franklin, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because John Adams
That's
also.
That's just his official family. Who knows about all
that? Right. So they show him sick. John Adams sick. They show him getting bled.
Yes,
he's deliriously sick.
Those scenes are so hard. I can watch the goriest like horror movies. It does nothing to me. But I watch someone slowly get bled out. It makes me almost pass out.
Yes.
It's bad.
Very gross. Again, the flies, the heat, the sweat, the deliriousness. He's rambling. And then they smash cut back to, and this is the end of the episode. Abigail, actually, there's one more scene after because they have to cut back to Holland. Mm-hmm. But it's Abigail reading. A writer comes with a parcel and he throws it onto their front porch like a newspaper boy. And they get the letter and she's reading it to the kids, talking about the account of Cornwallis's surrender.
Yeah.
Which isn't the end, but we're near the end of the war now. And then Abigail Adams, and I want to talk to you about this, when she says, "God be praised," and General George Washington. Which doesn't really, it sets us up to just talk about it, I guess, because I don't know the whether it's ahistorical or not. I know in the time there was a lot of reverence for George Washington. I don't know exactly when the deification started.
Almost immediately.
But this is what they're really portraying
Almost
here.
Immediately. I mean, to your point, like we talked about this last week a bit, and we'll get into it. But like, this is why when years later the Constitution was written, it was written like the presidency was inserted in there. There was only one guy they were thinking of.
That's right.
It was made for him.
And the way a lot of people talk about it, and I don't know how accurate this is that he almost had to be talked into it because he just wanted to go back to Mount Vernon. He just wanted to go back to his life, making his whiskey, and being one of the richest men in America. And he was. He was that.
He had to be talked into it, and he was on paper very rich, but he was actually quite poor money-wise, which was part of the reason why he got talked into being president. Because he was he needed to borrow $500 just to go to his own inauguration.
That's
and
right.
part of it, we created the presidency because of the failures of the Articles of Confederation, the need for a strong executive. Everyone knows that who's ever gone to American civics. But Washington himself needed it because he's like, I need to call in some debts.
Yeah, what was the salary? Like $28,000, $20,000 or something?
Something like that.
Which is a lot. It was a lot.
Ton. Yeah, it's a ton. But like more than that, he had all this land that he couldn't get any money from anyone else because all colonies all states at that point were like little independent mercantile republics.
Well, even under the Articles of Confederation, there were like 6,000 different forms of currency some crazy number. So that might not be it.
But no, it was insane. And so he's like, I can't get any of my money. I'm in debt. I need it. All right, I'll be the president.
Yeah. And that's it's not where we are now in the episode, but it is. There's a lot of misinformation about George Washington. We're going to get to it because we got an email about George Washington. But the episode ends. This is where we'll end this about this particular episode. The episode ends kind of in a cliffhanger.
I wrote, Jesse, I swear to God, I wrote ends on a bit of a cliffhanger.
I said this episode ends in quote unquote cliffhanger.
Hell yeah.
With John Adams on his potential deathbed. Yep. Spoiler alert, we know he didn't die because he becomes the second president of the United States, but he is sick AF. Yeah. He is not having a good time with the illness. Yeah. And that's where they end it.
Yeah, this was a bit of a brutal episode for him. Last episode wins left and right for Adams. This one, from start to finish, he took L's at home, he took L's on the ship, he took L's at court, and then he took L's just in his own body.
Yeah, and even with his wife. With the juxtaposition, they're showing how he is neglecting, whether by design or whether just by circumstance, he's neglecting her. It is a big lose. It's a loser for him, this episode. Yeah. That's true. So we did get an email. And I think Ian, since I read that whole Ben Franklin bullshit. I think you should read this, and we can address this. Again, the email address for the show is info@johnadamspodcast.com. We welcome your communication. We welcome corrections. We welcome sparring, and we welcome commentary like this.
Yeah, because
questions like this.
We're making provocative statements, you and I. Constantly on here.
But we have strong opinions, too.
We have strong opinions, and we love history. This is what history is. If anyone ever tells you that history is about memorizing dates and names, like, they don't know what they're talking about.
Let me tell you something. If you had a history teacher in high school or in college that was about dates and memorization of this, you got robbed.
Massive disservice.
I have had some amazing civics and social studies and history professors and teachers in high school and on that made it come alive. And I love it so much. And I hope we bring that in what we're doing here.
Yeah, and it's important too, because history is one of the main subjects that is constantly under attack right now.
Yes.
From the right, because they're like, well, you're teaching the wrong type of history. You're teaching, genders and racial DEI, and like, we just want you to teach the right type of history. But
and to them, the right type of history is, well, listen, it wasn't all bad for the slaves that were brutally raped and murdered and trafficked and abused and objectified. It wasn't all bad. They learned a trade. Yeah, they learned valuable skills.
There is no way to say it in a way that they would like, so they just like, all right, we got to get rid of it. Yeah. And so, no, it's important. And yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, we love this stuff, and we hope it's coming through.
So this email, I want you to read it also, because they use the British or European spelling of the word honorable.
Thank you, Sasha.
With the U.
Honorable hosts, spelled properly. Thank you most heartily for bringing such a wonderful podcast to us, your devoted listeners. I have not seen the series in question before, in parentheses. Indeed, I was not even aware of its existence, and I am enjoying it very much. I do, however, have one question about George Washington. Was he really such a saint-like figure? He is often portrayed, in my experience, as a deeply thoughtful, wise, compassionate, kind-hearted, loyal, don't know what that word is, man, like Tolkien's Aragorn, but in real life. I do not intend to downplay his role in U.S. history, of course. I only question the way writers choose to depict him and whether something of mythology might have been built around this figure and the world-changing events of the era. I do recall having a conversation along similar lines about the American dream with my English teacher some years ago. Thank you most kindly. I have the honor to be, sirs, your humble and obedient servant, Sasha M., Bucharest, Romania.
Well, I mean, listen, there's an easy answer to this question. He most certainly was a complex character, and that's being very, very generous.
Yeah.
But all of you may have heard, I don't know how intricately you've been told about George Washington being from Bucharest, but George Washington was an enslaver of human beings, owned hundreds of human beings as property. And in fact, all of the talk about him having wooden teeth is incorrect. A lot of the teeth inside of his fucking head were those of slaves that they yanked out of living slaves' mouths and then put into his own head. So he wasn't enlightened or compassionate or kind-hearted in many, many ways, although I'm sure that would be in the complexity of a fully formed human being. He was in other ways, if you were white, for instance.
Especially back then.
Or if you were one of his favorite enslaved individuals, the guy who, his gentry or whatever, who traveled with him, was a slave and was treated well.
Yeah, I mean, right. The way to think about Washington for me is he was a competent administrator, right? That was his main kind of value. He was a competent general. He was later a competent president. He viewed life very much as like a duty and like, let's getting on with it. He was not particularly talented. He did not have any strong beliefs at first.
Or like a super smart guy.
Or a super smart guy.
Because he wasn't formally educated.
No,
like
was not formally smart. He didn't go to fancy schools. He didn't care about the Enlightenment. He hated being a delegate. He didn't want to be that at all. But what was interesting about him, like you said, came from a very wealthy family.
Yeah.
And got lucky. He was the second son, but his older brother died, so he inherited that wealth. There was some other inheritance, so he kept getting wealthier and wealthier. And he eventually got a commission in the British Army as something his family.
He was a surveyor.
He was a surveyor. Yeah. His family were land speculators.
Yeah.
Which is the sort of original job. It's the original job of any kind of America. is to go and get that free real estate.
Yeah, that's right.
So
massive swaths of free land.
Yeah.
And well, not free. I mean, you took it from indigenous
right.
who didn't own it like the way we look at things,
which is again part of the main reason why we declared independence in of itself, because the British told us to stop. But Washington, while during what we call the French and Indian War, what you in Romania call the 7 Years' War, was captain in the British Army. He was passed over for promotion because he was an aristocrat, but he wasn't like an aristocrat like the British people were. They
looked at us as second class.
Yeah.
They looked down on us.
Yeah, you could say he developed a kind of class consciousness as a result.
Sure.
And was like, well, fuck the British.
Yeah.
We can, then that was kind of his politics for going into that. It wasn't any of these broad, things about freedom that Adams talked about. It was more like, no, I'm sick of, we can do this ourselves. We don't need to be told what to do by England.
Yeah.
So I agree with everything you said about, like, he was an enslaver. I mean, when we talked last week about the various, stamp acts and things like that, Washington said something like, they're treating us no better than we do the blacks, right? Like this was a guy who believed in slavery and believed in some of the worst parts even then.
Let's also very quickly address that. Maybe we'll say it again in a future episode. But a lot of people will push back against, well, they didn't know at the time. This was just the custom. They just thought it was okay. And that's not true.
No.
The vast majority, even of our enslaving founding fathers, wrote about what an evil it was, including Washington, including Jefferson, including Madison, and they still did it. So whether they be hypocrites or just vile enslaving monsters, I guess we'll leave that to the audience.
Yeah.
But they knew it was wrong.
Yeah, right. There were abolitionists then.
Yes.
Right? There were plenty of them. So
and also, there's an entire population that knew it was wrong, and they were enslaved.
Correct. Yeah, good. Very good point.
They knew it was wrong because they were being abused.
Very good point. And look, so part of the other reason that he has, I think, this reputation is that he famously was not part of a political party.
Right.
He was against factionalism. He hated it.
He also, very carefully, Sasha, self-curated his image to be looked upon. Eventually, I don't think he knew this would happen, but to be mythologized.
Yes.
I mean, he was notorious for how he comported himself, how he stood, how quiet he was, how true to his word he was. And like he was an honorable, trustworthy guy.
He looked the part. He was tall. He was like 6'4", and this was a time when the average person was like 5'2".
He's taller than me.
And you're a giant.
I'm 6'3".
No, I know. So I mean, but like back then.
Well, let's compare him to James Madison, who was like 5'4".
Okay, that's not fair. That was the biggest nerd of them all. that was the loser front of the class.
Well, even John Adams was a shorter guy.
Oh yeah,
maybe 5'7".
Yeah,
maybe 5'6".
I think that's even the average height back then was like pretty short.
Yes,
it was even shorter than that.
Shorter than what it is today in America, which is like 5'9".
Yeah, by a lot.
Yeah. So he was a giant man for the time.
And we also talked about this last week, but it's worth repeating. Like, yeah, he might not have technically had a political party, and he might have hated faction, but he was a Federalist.
Yeah.
He appointed Hamilton to the Treasury. He was
knowing how Hamilton would be received by the rest of especially Thomas Jefferson.
Correct.
Because Thomas Jefferson was the first Secretary of State for the United States. Alexander Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury. They're both in the cabinet together. And it's not like D.C., there wasn't even D.C. at the time, it was New York. But it's not like the cabinet was these massive organizations. It was a ragtag group of dudes.
In a room like this big.
Yeah.
Yeah. And part of it, I understand Washington's point was he was basically like, I was appointed president. You told me to do this. Part of the reason you told me to do this was to start imposing federal power.
Yeah.
Like and why are these stupid Jeffersonians not letting me do it? And he got so pissed off that during the Whiskey Rebellion, he led the troops to put it down himself personally. Like that is how committed he was to the federal project.
Right.
So
and not committed to the prospect of being a civilian leading in charge of the commander in chief, not an actual military leader.
Yep.
But listen. I'm a guy who, there are certain deal breakers for me. Slavery is one of them. But I would be remiss and I would be short-sighted to not say, yeah, he's a complicated character. Does he need to be deified? Absolutely not. He was just a human dude with all kinds of failings.
Yes.
So to paint him as all of those descriptors that you gave, Sasha,
no, and it's not
kind-hearted, loyal.
It's not your fault. That's why
certainly not
what
like Aragon or whatever the Lord of the Rings character is.
No, he's not Aragon. But like that is what both he wanted, what the American education system wanted, and like what America wants to portray about Washington.
Yeah,
and like I still think I agree with the slave thing as being a deal breaker. I'd still probably put him close to a top 10 president. Pretty close up there.
Sure.
Like it
just based on lack of mistakes.
Yeah, it couldn't have worked with any other guy.
Yeah.
It had to have been him to start by design.
Also, because of that self-curated image, he was venerated by future presidents who followed the precedent of only 2 terms until FDR came along because of circumstance. Hadn't there been a Great Depression, and I don't like FDR because of internment camps.
Oh, he's my favorite president.
Oh man,
yeah, he's my favorite.
Tell it to 150,000 Japanese.
I'm not saying
80% of them American citizens. Marched to camps.
I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm not saying he's like ideal, but
I have a hard time. I'm black and white guy. A lot of things, man.
Yeah, but
I'm realizing it as I get older that it's not like a positive thing.
No, I think it's not positive or negative. It's just sort of how we view the world. I totally get it. But yeah, I kind of agree with FDR. It's like, why? Who cares? I'm the best one. You
mean who cares that he ran, not who cares internment camps?
Oh yeah, I care. Yes. Good point. Thank you, Jesse. That is the clarification of the day. I am. Please don't put on like as the Chiron like Ian who cares about internment camps. I want to say bravely anti-internment camp.
Who cares that he broke the 2-term precedent?
Yeah.
So, complex character, certainly did a lot of good for sure, but was at the helm of probably untold misery of if you just go to Mount Vernon, which you probably haven't, being from Romania, there's like unmarked graves of enslaved individuals, a literal stone's throw from his, it's not opulent, but his tomb on Mount Vernon.
So if you go on Christmas and see the Christmas camel.
Christmas camel?
They have a camel called Aladdin that they bring every Christmas.
Really?
Yeah.
Is Christmas Day a real day to go?
So not Christmas Day, but like Christmas time.
Christmas time.
Like the month of December, like around there, they bring it. Because I guess Washington back in the day was like, we need a camel here. And so he brought a camel from the Ottoman Empire in December.
Wow.
Like on that ship, to bring it all back, that terrible ship, this poor camel, in December had to cross from the Middle East to Virginia because Washington was like, well, we need a camel, obviously.
That's another thing I learned in fact-checking this episode is that they had to actually set sail without John and John Quincy.
Oh, really?
And then they had to catch up to the ship because the ship was named Boston, and they were being patrolled and like board, like they were afraid of being captured.
Yeah.
So they had to get on board way outside of Boston.
I see. Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. That's a long episode.
It was a
long episode for a short episode.
For sure. Because this is my favorite. Loved everything that was happening. Loved the opulence, the story, the filmmaking, storytelling. Like this, I had a smile for most of the time.
And we didn't even get to talk about how John Adams broke in on Ben Franklin bathing with the old lady.
Oh God, I forgot about that. I truly forgot about that.
We'll titillate you with that.
Yeah.
Old man, old lady, prune. You know they were pruny.
They were pruny before they went in, right. But then, yeah.
So we'd love to hear from you again. 714-576-4054. You can call and leave us a fewer than 3-minute voicemail. It's Google and they will cut you off. And also we encourage the email communication like Sasha from Romania is info@johnadamspodcast.com. Anything else, Ian?
No, I think we did it.
All right, we did it, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next episode. Again, I am Jesse Dollemore. You can find me on social media at Dollemore on Twitter and Threads and TikTok and all the social media at Dollemore. Where can they find you, Ian?
I'm at Team Ian. You can follow along during my summer cut. It's happening. I'll give you updates. Don't worry.
All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.